A father raised the knife over his only son, and the son said nothing. Not one word of protest is recorded in the entire chapter, and that silence should terrify you more than the knife does. What if Isaac wasn't confused at all? To understand why that silence matters, you need to remember what Isaac actually was to Abraham. Not just a son, the impossible one. God had promised Abraham descendants as numerous as the stars, and then made him wait decades, through Sarah's barrenness, through 100 years of age, before Isaac was finally born. Genesis 21:5 tells us Abraham was 100 years old when his son was born. Isaac wasn't just precious, he was the entire promise, walking around on two legs. And then God says something that has unsettled readers for 3,000 years. Genesis 22:2, "Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering." 3 times in that single sentence, God names exactly what's being asked for. Your son, your only son, the one you love, as if daring Abraham to pretend he doesn't understand the weight of the request. Here's what the text doesn't tell you, and it's the detail that should stop you cold before we go any further. Abraham doesn't argue. Genesis 22:3, "And Abraham rose up early in the morning," early. Not after a sleepless night of negotiating with God, the way he had negotiated over Sodom just 1 chapter earlier, bargaining God down from 50 righteous people to 10. Here, nothing. He saddles his donkey, takes 2 servants and Isaac, splits wood for the burnt offering, and starts walking for 3 days. Hold on to that number, because 3 days of walking beside your son toward his own death, saying nothing, is its own kind of unbearable. Genesis 22:4, "Then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off." Whatever was happening inside him during those 3 days of silence, the text doesn't give us a single word of it. When they reach the base of the mountain, Abraham tells the servants to stay behind, and then he says something remarkable. "I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you." Genesis 22:5. Come again, both of us. Whether that's faith, denial, or a promise Abraham didn't yet understand he was making, hold on to it, because it matters later. Then comes the detail I think most people read past too quickly. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. Genesis 22:6. Isaac carries the wood for his own sacrifice up the mountain on his own back. And the text adds 1 small phrase, twice, once here and once a few verses later, and they went both of them together. Now Isaac speaks, and this is the only line he gets in the entire chapter. "My father." And Abraham said, "Here am I, my son." And Isaac said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Genesis 22:7. It's such an ordinary question, a boy noticing what's missing. Abraham answers, "My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering." Genesis 22:8. And then, again, so they went both of them together. They reach the place. Abraham builds the altar, arranges the wood, and then binds Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Genesis 22:9. Bound on an altar, and still nothing. No recorded struggle, no cry. Abraham stretches out his hand and takes the knife to slay his son. Genesis 22:10. And that's the moment I want you to actually sit in, because here's the question almost nobody asks about this story. Why didn't Isaac run? For most of history, this scene gets pictured with a small child, mostly because of how it's illustrated in Sunday school books. A boy small enough for an old man to overpower without a fight. But look at the timeline the text itself gives you. Genesis 23 opens right after this chapter with the death of Sarah at 127 years old. Sarah was 90 when Isaac was born. Do the math, and Jewish tradition did exactly that centuries ago. Rabbinic sources place Isaac at around 37 years old at the binding. Not a child, a grown man in the prime of his strength, standing beside a father who by this point was pushing 140. A 140-year-old man does not overpower an able-bodied adult and tie him to an altar against his will. If Isaac didn't run, it wasn't because he couldn't, it's because he chose not to. The first-century Jewish historian Josephus, writing centuries after Genesis but drawing on tradition well known in his day, actually gives Isaac words in his retelling, describing him, around 25 years old in that version, willingly consenting, even encouraging his father to go through with it. That's not in the biblical text itself, it's later tradition, and I want to be honest about that distinction. But whatever his exact age, the arithmetic Genesis itself gives you already points the same direction. This wasn't a child too naive to be afraid. This was a man who understood exactly what a knife and an altar meant, and who walked up that mountain anyway. That's the secret hiding inside the silence. This was never only Abraham's test. Then the angel of the Lord calls to him out of heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here am I." And he said, "Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son from me." Genesis 22, 11 through 12. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. Genesis 22, 13. The same phrase as before, lifted up his eyes. The first time, he saw the mountain of his son's death. The second time, in the exact same posture, he saw provision instead. Abraham names the place Jehovah-jireh. The Lord will provide. And the angel calls to him a second time, reaffirming everything. Descendants like the stars, like the sand on the seashore, and one line that reaches centuries forward. In thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. Genesis 22:18. The book of Hebrews, written generations later, tells us what Abraham was actually thinking on that mountain, accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead. Hebrews 11:19. Abraham wasn't walking up that mountain in despair. He was walking up it, believing God would either stop him or reverse what he was about to do. And Isaac, whatever he understood, walked beside him the whole way. Here's what I think this story is actually asking you. Not whether you'd pass Abraham's test, whether you'd pass Isaac's. Abraham's faith gets almost all the attention. The knife in his hand, the voice from heaven. But somebody had to lie down on that altar and stay there. Somebody had to carry the wood for their own sacrifice up the mountain and not run when they understood exactly what it meant. That's the kind of trust this story is actually asking for. Not blind, not confused, not too young to know better. Walking together, eyes open, toward whatever comes, believing there's provision on the other side of it, even when you can't see it yet. If this story is one you needed today, stay close, because there's another one coming that goes just as deep. And if you're watching in good faith, leave the like now, before the video ends. That's what tells me you want more of these.